Nigeria's exports outpaced imports in the third quarter of 2025, pushing the country's trade surplus to 6.69 trillion naira. While the numbers suggest improving trade dynamics, questions remain around sustainability, structure, and what this really means for businesses, consumers, and the broader economy. Beyond the headline figures, the key issue is whether Nigeria is witnessing a genuine shift in production and competitiveness, or simply reacting to economic pressures. Professor Ken Ife, Global Consultant on Developmental Economics, joins me now. Good morning, Prof. If you can just unmute briefly, but I would like to imagine when you see a trade surplus of this size, should Nigerians be celebrating or should we be asking more questions about what is driving it?
The answers are pretty clear. Because there are two major things that will hit you. One, the massive devaluation means we have opened up our products for export. And so people are responding to that opportunity. It's huge. When you have about 200% devaluation, it makes your products so cheap that even your neighbors, your immediate neighbors will be coming for you. So the second one was if even in the non-oil sector, we've seen the likes of Dangote change the entire map of export on the oil sector, exporting vigorously, polypropylene, fertilizers, and refined product, jet fuel. Those two can hit you immediately. So you can see where some of those are coming from. But there are other things too that are spiking up, like import of agriculture is still higher than the export of agriculture. So you get about 1.1 trillion of agri import compared to the much less than 1 trillion of export of work. But we can talk about those, just under 800 billion.
I think that would be concerning, the imports of agriculture, considering the arable land Nigeria has. But again, you've highlighted the silver lining of devaluation. Now, how much of this exported growth perhaps reflects real expansion in productive capacity, and how much is simply the result of, as you have pointed out, weaker import demand?
Well, I think it's more to do with weaker import demand than expansion on productive capacity, because we have constraints on security. The security constraint is so horrendous. And then we also have an extremely low level of mechanization. And we've been waiting for the disbursement of 2,000 tractors that have been released. That would have made a big difference this year. But I understand that it will come in the early next season. So hopefully that will also affect the landscape. But the thing is that the cost of import is so high that people are looking for alternatives. So because you have a very high devaluation, so the cost of import is correspondingly very, very high. And people are just finding alternative replacement for those products. So that is dampening consumption, imported products. It's dampening that.
Yeah, I assume that's a good thing, right? That we're losing our appetite for imported products and looking for local alternatives.
Of course it is. And don't forget, we are running also on the back of a recent approval of 30% mandatory value addition on our raw materials. This has been passed by 2 houses of parliament, and it's been sitting there with the president awaiting accent. But while it's still awaiting accent, federal government has also just kicked out a policy, restricting shea butter for the next 6 months, because shea butter is a major component of the export. So that is sending the signal that we are coming. So all this frivolous, in fact, eventually going to affect crude oil export because it's raw. So we're going to see a lot of motion in that area, and people are bracing up for the impact of it.
And I mean, it's good that you've highlighted that 30% value addition. Would you say the trade surplus perhaps is a sign that we're finally exporting more value? Or is what we're exporting largely, shipping of raw commodities?
Well, the raw commodities we are shipping is coming down without a doubt, because the export of the raw material we exported was 1.04 trillion naira,
I mean, I think it sounds rather exciting, the value addition, what that means for local industry, job creation. But let's circle back a bit. We're talking about obviously the impact that this is having, more exports, less of an appetite for imported goods. What does that part of this conversation mean for local industries? There are some who are raising concerns that, maybe those industrialists may begin to have more of an appetite for exporting and forget their local markets, and the goods may go out of reach of the locals.
I don't think that's true. You see, China, if you look at Chinese strategy is primarily exports. They will produce things and be exporting them. They don't consider local consumption yet. They want to develop the export market and then ride on the back of the export market to backwardly integrate. So later it will come, because don't forget, local market is very expensive. Export market is a lot cheaper because you are not charging your company tax on it. You're not charging your VAT on it. You're not charging all kinds of taxes. So they go out, they earn you the dollar that you require to pay for imports of machinery and all kinds of things, and to stabilize your forex regime and the foreign reserves, which in turn strengthens your currency. So it is a catch-22. So it is the other way around. Go out first on export, and then when you have an export, you have a backward impact on your production capacity. Because you have markets asking for your goods, then you can actually turn back and organize your production, your food production on the ground, to be able to enable you to meet your export demand. So in that way, you create more jobs at home. You create, so it's better. That is the better way to configure your economy, rather than the other way. Continue to produce only for your economy, and they never have a look in export. So you are so vulnerable to the people you are going to be fighting against are people who have products that are cheaper than yours, because they are also exporting their products outside tax, outside VAT. So they will land, and then you start asking the customs to bring in ad valorem tax and all of that, when it should be the other way around. It should be the aggressor.
I mean, exciting times. And as you have pointed out, it's important we have a strategy around all of this that emulates the likes of Made in China 2025, that, in 2015, that grew the Chinese economy. And while this all sounds very exciting, sounds like we're on an upward trajectory, we still want to examine the risks. So are there any risks that we face if this trade performance perhaps remains heavily tied to global commodity prices?
Well, if you want to consider one particular case, look at what is the war of attrition on the import of petrol. Just look at that. You are building local capacity. You've got Dangote with $20 billion, now going to get another $20 billion investment by exporting, doubling the size of the import. And here you're also having licenses being issued for 7.5 billion liters of imported fuel, imported substandard fuel. That tension alone tells you where the whole aggregate will end. At what point do you draw a line? Bring Nigeria out of import dependency so that we can fight poverty forever, or continue to export your jobs by exporting your raw crude, and then import poverty by importing all kinds of frivolous products. So the answer is clear. It's clear. There's no way you will sell raw materials at 10% to 15% of its value chain and then go and borrow money to buy the same finished product at 100% of its value in the value chain. You will never develop. The economy will continue to underdevelop ad infinitum. That's the economics of it. So you have to tackle that. Any country that wants to be independent, economically independent, has to tackle import dependency, because that makes you vulnerable to every conceivable global macroeconomic headwind. It doesn't matter whether it is supply chain disruption, it doesn't matter whether it's COVID-19, it doesn't matter whether it is the American subprime property crisis, it doesn't matter. Anything that happens globally will affect you. Otherwise, why would Nigeria be affected when we have oil and gas? Russia has oil and gas, but the war in Ukraine found that Europe is 40% dependent on their gas, and turning down the tap, prices went through the roof in Europe, and we import hugely from Europe, and we imported on inflation. That is the danger.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of countries learned the hard way, as you have pointed out, with the Russia-Ukraine war and COVID, to be less dependent on imports. Let's also look at some of the bottlenecks, right, with exports and that whole sector. Ports, logistics, power, the infrastructure. How important are all these things in determining whether this export momentum can be sustained?
Extremely important, because WTO says 15% of all your trade volume is lost in lack of trade facilitation. Let's look at what it means to Nigeria. Nigeria's import-export is about $120 billion. Now imagine that $18 billion a year is lost because of failure to facilitate trade. And who bears that burden is the private sector. Where do they happen? They just transfer that to the population. And you have high inflation, you have all kinds of things. That is what it is. So we are paying that penalty. Then secondly, you come to authorized economic operators. I did a work for World Bank. I led a program for World Bank in 2012 to look at Lagos-Abidjan Transit Corridor. How do we do authorized economic operator, both national and regional? And it was positive. But Nigeria has not implemented. Others are implementing, which means that if you have tourist trade traders, if these traders are bringing in hundreds of ship of goods, don't stop those goods at the port. Go and check it in their warehouse so that you won't decongest the port. They are trusted to, but then when you sign up to them, if they ever, you may be doing inspection once every 10 goods, 10 trucks. If you ever find any problem, say 10% defect, you will levy that 10% across all their import that year. So it's such a penalty that they won't try it. So these are schemes that are intended to open up the corridor, facilitate the trade, and then and what have you. But we are very, very slow in adopting. Look at our shipping lines. We're supposed to be a hub in the whole of Africa, a shipping hub. Well, where are we? We still have all these small ports that have 4,000 ships, rather than deep sea ports where a Panamax will come with 16,000 to 17,000 containers. Rather than this small thing, you go to the offshore, you go to the deep sea to go and offload. It's so inefficient, so time consuming. And then you come and spend 12 weeks. And even the national single window, I've been fighting for this in 2010. Not only now that the Comptroller General are saying that they're going to do it now, but other states, other countries in our region have done that by 2012. They've all done that. Nigeria is lagging behind. With national single window, it means that your goods will be cleared, guaranteed to be cleared within 24 hours. And because it's taking 2 weeks, our traders go to Cotonou and Lomé to go and clear their goods. So these are the challenges. So there's so much inefficiency, chronic inefficiency at the level of the customs that we need to deal with those, to unload and unpack the price, like all the problems that we are having out there.
Indeed, and hopefully we catch up in that regard. Let's look at the policies. We've talked about several policies that are driving industrialization, the 30% value addition, and even proposed policies, Nigeria first, and I think there's some taxation on certain imports, commodities, right? When it comes to policy, what more needs to be done? What mistakes do we need to avoid so that we don't reverse some of these gains that we're seeing at the moment?
Well, by January, the fiscal reform will also kick in and sort out some of the issues around tax waivers and tax incentives, because it was very indiscriminate. But now they are focusing it on real sector, focusing it in the critical sector. So that will help. And then also we need to do more about infant industry protection. Every country in the world protects their infant industry. The complexity of the Dangote integrated refinery, I use the word integrated refinery, is an infant industry in that sense, and it should be protected. It's a national asset, it should be protected. You shouldn't decimate, because you are sending a wrong signal to the investors who are coming into Nigeria. $50 billion is going to be spent on a new refinery in Ondo. Bua is building a new refinery in Akwa Ibom. Yeah. Another guy is building a new refinery in Lagos. 3 modular refineries are starting, and you are still kicking this in the teeth. We should be a global refining hub in Nigeria, supplying to the whole of Africa and beyond. Already Dangote is supplying to Brazil, Saudi Arabia, America. We have the capacity to do that. And you can compare yourself to Texas. Texas has 32 refineries and about 5,000 small petrochemical industries surrounding them. And all of them are exporting to the entire world. Why don't you have that in Nigeria?
Right. I mean, the blueprints. Yeah, the blueprints globally are already there. Hopefully we do catch up and make the most of what we have and the momentum we have going on now. Thank you so much for your thoughts and insights. Professor Ken Ife.
It was a pleasure.
Yes, global consultant on developmental economics.